Hello, everyone. We'll give it just a moment for a few more people to join, and then we'll start just a couple minutes after the top of the hour. Thank you for joining. All right, for those of you just joining us, we'll give it a couple of minutes for everyone to flood into Zoom, and then we'll start getting going here. All right, so it looks like we're about at our leveling off with our attendees. So I'll go ahead and get started. If you want to know where you are in Think Like an Attacker, which is presented by Sherrod DeGrippo, which is me. And we'll go ahead and kick it off. If you've got questions, please feel free to put those into the Q&A panel, and I'll try to get to as many of those as I can once we near the end here. So let's kick it off. So what we're going to talk about today is understanding the decisions that threat actors make, why they make the decisions they make, who they're targeting, what exactly is happening out on the landscape that gives us the information about what these attackers are doing and why. And so I want to kind of do a little bit of an exercise. So let me ask you if you could pull out a piece of paper and a pencil or a text editor of your choice, and I'll introduce myself while you grab those things. My name is Sherrod DeGrippo. I am the Senior Director of Threat Research and Detection at Proofpoint. I've been in information security about 16 years, and I've primarily worked at information security vendors prior to that with the United States federal government at the NNSA, which is an administration that's intended to help protect the United States nation's nuclear weapons stockpile. So at Proofpoint, what I do is I lead our threat research teams that detect targeted attacks against our customers and then explain what they are, essentially protecting our customers from threats and then informing our customers about the threats that are targeting them. I lead our emerging threats team as well, which creates a network signature IDS set every day. We release those. And I also run our professional information services team on the threat research side. I am located in Atlanta, Georgia. My favorite protocol is DNS. If you don't have a favorite protocol yet, I suggest getting one, learning it backwards and forwards, and then understanding how to abuse it if you really want to take it to the next level. My Twitter is at Sherrod_IM. I tweet about two things for the most part: information security and my dog, who is a superstar. So hopefully some of that content will be of interest if you'd like to follow me on Twitter. So what are these threat actors thinking about? We get these threats coming in, we talk about attackers, we talk about threat actor groups, we talk about criminal actors, we talk about nation state, APT lined groups. And in the past, I think some of you have been paying close attention to the landscape. You started to see hacktivism out there as well, coming back the way that it was back near 2008 and earlier. So what are these individuals and groups thinking about? How are they doing this work? What are the decision-making criteria that they use? And how can we start to understand the way that they think so that we can make smarter decisions in our environments? So you pulled out your piece of paper or you opened a text editor and you did not have a text editor war with any of your friends about which is the best text editor because it's obviously Vim. So let's pretend you're a threat actor and we're going to do an email attack. So I just want you to write a couple of things down. The reason you're writing them down is because at the end of this presentation, you're going to go back and look at what you wrote down before you knew any of the stuff that I'm about to tell you, and you're going to see how well you did. So who would you target? You can target any person that has an email address. That's the only requirement, is they must have an email address. Think about what you know about them. Think about what you might be able to find out about them if you did some OSINT research, if you Googled them, if you looked them up in various places. And then think for a moment, what does that person have access to, right? So certain people have more privileged access in an environment than others. So maybe sketch out kind of what that person has access to. So who is our target? Just has to be a human with an email address. Now, as they say on the internet, no one knows that you're a dog. You can pretend to be anyone you want to be, especially in an SMTP header. So you can make your friendly from anything that you want it to be. So who are you going to pretend to be? And when we create our attack, that email will say that it is from whatever name you want that to be, whatever name, whatever organization. That field is completely open to you. So what's your payload going to be? And we'll walk through some of these, but before we get into that, just think off the top of your head. Do you want to do a malware campaign? Do you want to send them to a credential phishing page? Do you want to do some kind of fraud that doesn't involve either of those, where you simply use social engineering? What's your payload mechanism going to be that's going to get that person, that's going to get you that access and the things that you want in the end of your campaign? Then we have to decide what our social engineering wrap is going to be. So how are you going to get them to take the action? Any of these things typically require your victim or your target to take some kind of action on your behalf. Clicking a link, putting some information in, maybe sending some information to you over email, maybe taking some action on their side. What are you going to say that's going to get them to do that? And then finally, what do you want to achieve? In the end, how do you know that you have been a successful threat actor, right? We're coming from that threat actor mindset. So what is your success criteria? How much money do you need? How many attacks do you have done that are successful? How many yachts do you need on the Black Sea? How many mansions do you need in Eastern Europe? Like, what are you doing? When do you know that it's time to stop? Or are you going to say, you know what, let it ride. I'm just going to keep going. I'm just going to keep going until the end. I'm a threat actor till the day I die. So you want to kind of have some sort of success criteria in the end there. Write those down quickly. We'll go through some information and then we'll revisit this when we're done. So let's talk about the vectors in the landscape that we see. Email, absolutely the #1 threat vector. That's why we're creating an email campaign here. We do about 5 billion emails a day at Proofpoint. Around 80% of email is spam. Now, that's not a threat. That's stuff like email marketing, anything that you kind of say, delete that, I don't want to see that. That's a lot of email out there. We do about 1 billion emails with deep inspection in our tap protection capability, which means we look at those URLs, we understand the attachments. And that database is made up primarily of enterprise, business, commercial, government, both US and other nation government, NGOs, Fortune 1000, all of this data coming through that we're inspecting all the time. And so this is where you have to make a choice about what you're going to weaponize. Are you making a URL, an attachment? Are you doing pure social engineering, email fraud? Or are you combining all of those together, which is a very popular tactic, as you can probably guess, to put all of them into one. Where are we seeing this stuff come from? We'll dig a little bit deeper into that, but we're seeing organized crime. We're seeing nation sponsored, and we'll talk a little bit about the third point a little bit later. So a lot of this comes out of Eastern Europe, Russia, West Africa, and various other places around the world. The reason that we see so much of it out of former Soviet countries and Russia is because they typically have laws that don't really result in a lot of those threat actor groups experiencing any sort of adverse effect from doing this kind of crime. A lot of those countries just sort of say, look, as long as you're sending this stuff out, you're not attacking your neighbors, you're not hitting your own country, we'll let it slide and not really worry about it. And I think that we started to see the impacts of that more and more and more from the large ransomware events that we've seen over the past 12 to 24 months. These governments in those countries providing sort of a safe haven, as long as you play by their rules, has created a pretty bad situation in the rest of the world for ransomware. Of course, we're also looking at things like APT. So those nation-sponsored actors that have the backing of a government, primarily the big four, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran. We also look at those smaller programs in other countries like Vietnam, India, Pakistan, and those countries that have APT programs and they are doing cyber espionage, but they just don't have the program sophistication, obviously, of the big four. So we all working in information security know that this just goes on and on and on. And we're constantly looking at what these threat actors are doing and trying to understand what their next move might be, which is sort of where that chess analogy comes in. And we look at things in terms of a campaign. So a campaign is a time-bound series of events. And when we say time-bound in our world, we typically look at those campaigns as being from 24 to 48 hours. We don't like to make campaigns last much longer than that because most of our threat actors will do something for one day and the next day they'll change or the next day they'll stop. And we really focus on an actor-centric point of view because we're looking at what those humans are doing to the other humans that are their target. When we talk about people-centric security, that's really what that means. It's not only about the people who are the recipients or the targets of these threats, but it's about the people that are sending them as well. It really incorporates so much human choice that we need to be aware of both sides of that equation. So again, we can use our three choices: malicious code, theft of credentials, or social engineering for fraud. And we look at financially motivated and state-aligned threat actors. And when we talk about those state-aligned threat actors, when we're looking at APT, we're thinking about threat actors that are doing it for one side or the other of a spectrum: pure espionage, covert action, spy versus spy, Cold War type, stuff like the movies. Or we're looking on the other side of the spectrum, and these actors that we consider APT that aren't necessarily state-aligned or state-sponsored, but are so sophisticated that they've reached that level of those kinds of threat actors. Now, for those of you that are looking at APT actors, you're probably aware that North Korea and Iran represent a combination of those. They've both been known to do espionage as well as combine it with financial campaigns in order to siphon some kind of funds, in the case of North Korea, cryptocurrency, obviously, into their respective countries. And when you look at Iran and North Korea, you can really see the difference. They're highly diplomatically isolated. They're socially isolated. They're isolated from the world economy. China and Russia obviously have some of that isolation, but they participate in the same way in the diplomatic community as any other Western country. They really just don't have the amount of isolation, sanctions, and concerns that North Korea and Iran do. So when we look at these campaigns, what are we really understanding? What are we seeing here? And this goes back to understanding that threat actor psychology. Actors take actions, and we can only see some of those actions. So you and I, as defenders, are below the line. Our visibility is really only a certain level and only a certain amount of these events. We can only see specific things happening, while in the background, the threat actor might be doing various things. And I tell my team all the time, I say, I want you to understand this threat actor to the point that you know not only when they take lunch, but what they're eating. We haven't gotten that far yet, but we do see them take breaks. There are threat actor groups that we know never send on a Friday. They work 4-day weeks, the end. A lot of these threat actors too, they work when their targets are working. So we see those campaigns come in a follow the sun model, which means that they're hitting Asia Pacific, Australia, they're coming over and starting to hit Europe, and then they hit North America last, usually ending on the West Coast. And they follow the workday that their targets use as well, sometimes slowing down their campaigns when those local business hours usually indicate lunch. They don't want to send campaigns when someone isn't there to click on them. The longer that email sits in that email box with no action, the higher the probability that that threat actor will not achieve their end goal, because all of these other countermeasures are happening. Emails are being pulled out of email boxes. Other measures are being put into place like IDS, web gateways, all kinds of other controls are happening. So that threat actor wants to minimize that time between when it drops in the email box and when that person clicks, opens, or takes that action in response. So they've got to get that person really when they're sitting at their desk doing email. When they're at lunch, when they're on vacation, if it's a major holiday, that's not a good time. And we see significant decrease in the threat landscape around major holidays, around the summer vacation times. Coronavirus has changed that a little bit because people are sort of working 24/7 every day. But typically we do see that reduction, and we see very little activity on the weekends, because if no one is there to click on it, why send something on a Saturday morning? It's just going to sit there until Monday, increasing the probability that it won't work by the time that person sits down to open their email. So let's talk attachment versus URL. These are the two main technical ways to send a campaign through email. And as you can see here, URLs are king. Attachments have really always been popular, but over the past 2 or 3 years, URLs have become the real thing to use. Now, you might wonder why URLs. Think about it. What do URLs have that attachments really don't in a lot of ways? URLs can be tracked, and URLs are essentially infinite in terms of uniqueness. You could create a different URL for every single person that you send your campaign to. And you can then use that to determine who does and does not click. So URL campaigns allow metrics tracking to be able to better refine how these threat actors operate. And yes, that is exactly what they do. They see how many clicks they get at a certain time of day. They see if certain lures get more clicks than others. They see if Monday campaigns perform better than Wednesday campaigns, and they adjust and adjust and adjust so that they can get the best return on the work that they're doing. So URLs present a lot of features and capabilities that attachments don't. But over the years that I've been doing this, I've seen it go back and forth and back and forth. I think URLs are here to stay for a couple of years, but we'll see if they start going back to attachments anytime soon. So as you can imagine, there's lots of ways to use a URL. You can click it, take it to a landing page where you've got to put in your username and password, classic credential phishing. You could do something where it links to another document, it links to a zipped file, it links to another page where you have to download a PDF. And we have seen these multi-stage attacks in the attack chain where the threat actors are trying to defeat controls like secure email gateways, like web gateways, and they're making that target click and download and click again and install this and click that so that they get around a lot of the protections that you and I are trying to put into place. We also see them purchase traffic in these traffic distribution systems like Katara or BlackTDS, which allows a threat actor to go into something like an ad platform, purchase a bunch of traffic, point it to their malicious website, and they don't even have to do an email, or they can send links to that email, send links in email to that landing page, and the traffic distribution system will send certain users to different types of content. So essentially you can see here, they're using a lot of the features that come with legitimate services in order to send malicious payloads. And in fact, for Q1, these are the top 5 domains hosting malicious content of any kind, whether it's malware or credential phish. AppSpot is our #1. And the reason that AppSpot is being leveraged by threat actors is because it is an app creation and hosting platform for Google APIs. And as you can see, our other 2 main abusers are google.com and googleapis.com. Dropbox and SendGrid are in there as well. And you can see these are common full-featured platform and hosting services. All these threat actors have to do is compromise one of them, and they can start using that as their infrastructure. Threat actors love this. It used to be all about bulletproof hosting, right? You needed to set up you need to get a colo in another country that wouldn't follow takedown processes. You need to pay a lot of money. You needed to hide your domains. You needed to do all this obfuscation to know who could find you. Well, that's not needed anymore. All you need to do is pop somebody's Dropbox, put your malware, send out your email campaign, and you're good to go. By the time it's discovered that this has been used for malware, your campaign's already been sent, your victims have already clicked, they've already downloaded your payload, you're good to go from there. So all of these platforms that enable content creation, web hosting, free, paid, trial services, all of that kind of stuff, the threat actors have found that to be their new sort of bulletproof infrastructure because they're so easy to get. So from the attachment side, what are we seeing? I wanted to mention XL4 macros. That is a Office Excel format that was invented 22 years ago and is still supported by Microsoft. One of the things that Microsoft has kind of become known for is that they'll support legacy platforms, legacy file types, legacy applications for literally decades. XL4 is one of those. Malicious macros have been leveraged by threat actors since they were invented, I'm sure. They allow the threat actors to run scripting in the background or small executables when the user clicks enable editing, enable content, etc. And that's a big way that we see a lot of things like downloaders getting onto machines. The reason that these are so common is because, again, we're looking at things that have legitimate uses being leveraged by threat actors for malicious purposes. And Office macros are one of those things. Something else when it comes to attachments that we found is actually PowerPoint. Normally, when you think of macros, you think of Office and you think of Excel. PowerPoint also has macros. And PowerPoint also has the ability to embed an executable within the PowerPoint. This is a really common tactic that threat actors are using. They're creating these PowerPoints, they're putting an executable at the end of it. By the time the person has walked through the PowerPoint and read all the slides, they're ready to click on anything. And so we've started to see some of that in the threat landscape. And that's a really common tactic, especially in Asia, because it's a very common way to distribute executables. Password protected documents. This is another way to get around protections that you have in your environment. Obviously, in the situation with a sophisticated secure email gateway, we get through this, but this is a really common one that threat actors have started to do. They'll put the password, as you can see, in the body of the email. One, it is an attempt to defeat protections, but two, it's also a great way to make a user feel like they're being secure and they're following best practices when it comes to protecting information and documents and things like that. So ICE-ID, I want to talk quickly about a couple of campaigns. ICE-ID is about a malware that we saw. It's very common, it's happening now, but we've been seeing it probably for the past 2 or 3 years. And it has been associated with things like Emotet, Qbot, TrickBot. It's one of those ones that's leveraged by multiple threat actors. And in this case, it's a really simple attack chain. It's an email with Microsoft Excel macros using Excel 4. And then when you click on enable content, it gives you ICE-ID. Interestingly, you'll notice that this is a DocuSign protected document, and it's got every logo here that it could possibly cram in. The DocuSign logo, the Microsoft logo, the McAfee logo, and then the Microsoft Office logo, all telling you this is secure, you need to enable this content. And this is what these typically look like. This is a banking Trojan that's stealing banking credentials that have been saved in that machine, specifically in the browser. So they've really been able to leverage this DocuSign branding, and they are blasting these out. We've seen campaigns of these in the tens and hundreds of thousands in a day, and they're sending them everywhere that you can possibly think of. This particular one ended in ransomware about 4 to 5 hours later. So once you get these downloaders like ICE-ID or Qbot on the machine, you start to see potential next stage payloads of ransomware. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. First, I want to go through a quick APT campaign. And that one is about Iran targeting Israeli and American medical researchers. And they had really specific specialties focusing on things like neurosurgery and various other really specific medical capabilities. And it was masquerading as an Israeli physicist sending these very incendiary social engineering lures about nuclear weapons and about Trump's maximum pressure shifting Iran's domestic politics from the European Council on Foreign Relations. And so these campaigns were extremely targeted. We wrote up the full intelligence brief on the blog. You can check that out. But the point is that these actors, whether they're crimeware actors or APT actors, they're really thinking about the social engineering that they're putting together. This one was very incendiary from a political standpoint, but we see cyber criminal actors using these same kinds of tactics as well. And this one specifically was intended to gather information and maintain access within those targets' machines. So it wasn't necessarily, anything like ransomware or disruptive. It was intended to get in, scrape a lot of information out, return that as espionage information, and then maintain that access so that they could continue to monitor what those people did on their computers. So let's talk ransomware. Ransomware has been really evolving over the past couple of years. In the days of Locky, 2016, 2017, the sort of innocent, naive days of ransomware, those ransomware actors would attach their ransomware as an attachment and send 1 million emails, literally 1 million. We've seen 3, 4, 5 million in a day with a ransomware attachment. This was years ago. The new way is part automated and part human. The reason that this has evolved this way, and we'll walk through the attack chain, The reason this has evolved this way is because we saw those actors like Locky, Globe Imposter, some of the smaller ransomware actors as well. They would blast out ransomware as an attachment, and they would charge $300 in Bitcoin to unlock your files. What would happen is information security teams, IT teams would just treat those laptops many times as stolen. They would treat them the same way as somebody, punched out my back window. My laptop was in the car. I know we're not supposed to do that, but they stole my laptop. You'd go to IT, you'd say, yeah, I've got ransomware. This is weird. I don't know. They'd take your computer, they'd issue you a new one and say, maybe you've lost your files, maybe you haven't. We're not paying this ransomware. We're just starting over. We're not going to worry about it. And so the IT security teams became this kind of churn where ransomware wasn't that big of a deal. It would happen a couple of times a month. They'd trade them out. They'd get people on their way. Things have evolved. That no longer works. And I'm going to show you why. The way ransomware acts today is much differently. So you have your threat actor with his cool spider laptop. He sends out a malicious Word document. It gets on the computers of 3 people. 2 of those people click. Our server admin, smart, doesn't click on it. It starts sending profiling information back to the command and control, and it sees, oh, I can send Bozzleloader, which is a backdoor, onto these machines now. So it sends Bozzleloader, and then Bozzleloader starts really, really ripping through those machines, finding out everything that it can about them, and sends back system profile information. That includes everything you can imagine: operating system version, what browser is default, what passwords are saved within the browser, what other applications are installed, versioning information, and then deeper system information like current IP address, what networks it's connected to, very important, all kinds of information about additional access, additional connections, sends all of that back through the command and control, and puts that system information in the hands of our threat actor. Now, we have seen that some of these will encourage a threat actor to literally get out of bed, get back on the machine, and see, oh, I've got something interesting. And that interesting piece is most likely either the host name or the network name that those 2 machines are connected to. Our threat actor sees there are 2 machines that are both connected to the same network. Let's send Cobalt Strike and let's get a full backdoor onto these 2 machines. Now we're in deeper trouble. Once this threat actor has the backdoor on, he can do a lot of remote access capability. Once that remote access is established, now we start pivoting lateral movement into the server admin who never clicked on the malicious macro, but now there's Cobalt Strike on that machine. So once a threat actor knows that there's Cobalt Strike on 2 of these basic VP of marketing and HR machines, the server administrator's information is sent back to the threat actor, and that's very exciting. The threat actor now says, I am going to send malware to the server administrator, to these internal servers, and I'm going to start popping lateral movement across every machine in that organization that I possibly can. And I'm going to send out Ryuk, a very prominent ransomware that we've seen through these downloaders for a really long time, maybe 2 years now. So once ransomware is on all of these machines, the threat actor has not just ransomed one laptop. Remember our example, somebody stole it out of the back of my car. Well, here's another laptop. You can't do that when you have this level of penetration into an organization and this many machines are under ransom. So these are all encrypted. You can't use them. You open this machine and it just has a ransom note saying your files have been encrypted. In order to get them back, you need to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what the threat actor has done effectively now is they have ransomed and shut down the operational capability of that organization. I want to be really clear and emphasize what the difference is here. I've not just ransomed a laptop and the files on that laptop. None of the machines, or a large percentage of the machines in this organization, do not function at all. And so now they can't do anything. I have my boot on their neck as the threat actor at that point to say, if you want to operate at all, you better pay up. So now that the threat actor has created this situation where an organization is under ransom, what happens next? So this is what we have typically seen happen. The multiple extortion vectors. Number one, the classic, pay me, I'll give you the decryption key, you'll get your files back, the end. We traditionally have seen that if you pay the threat actors, they will give you the decryption key. 9 times out of 10, at that point, you get your files back. So we've seen that that has worked. You know, the question is always, well, if I pay, are they really going to give it back? Most of the time, yes. Next vector, you can sell this data after you've extracted it. You can sell it in the underground, piece by piece, all at once, or you can sell it to another threat actor. Number three, you can say, I'm going to release all of this data publicly. And we have seen this happen in law enforcement agencies or other organizations that have sensitive information like confidential informant, Justice Department information, court evidence, things that are very, very sensitive that if they are released could result in some very bad situations for human individuals. So those are your three basic vectors that we see for getting paid in terms of extortion. And we're also seeing this become an interesting entanglement of criminal threat actors, nation-aligned or APT state-sponsored threat actors, and hacktivism actors, because each of them can kind of participate in this economy of buying the data that's been released, combing through the data that's been publicly released and leveraging it for hacktivism concerns, or the nation states use that as a primary funding vector to do additional espionage. And of course, the criminal threat actors are looking for their basic payday. This has really started to become troublesome. When we look at the recent organizations that have been ransomed, the criminal threat actors are now bumping up into concerns around things that could be considered terrorism, things that could be considered international breaking of treaties, things like that, because of the targets that they're stumbling into, not understanding what's happening there. Next, this has created a cottage industry of negotiators that have been hired by the threat actors or somebody that they keep on their staff in that criminal activity group to do strictly negotiation. Once that threat actor group says, we have this company under our thumb, they are encrypted, they're ready to talk, they have someone on standby that's all that person does. Maybe they have language skills, maybe they have interpersonal skills, maybe they know the inner workings of that company, so they know the difference between talking to a CFO versus talking to someone from the FBI. And then we've also seen negotiation for hire for ransomware victims, companies popping up that say, if you get ransomware, we'll negotiate with them for you. And so some of these chat logs that have been released, you can see the threat actors say, who am I speaking with? And are you authorized to negotiate because you are an employee of the company or an officer of the company? Or are you authorized to negotiate because you have been hired specifically to negotiate this? So all of this ransomware activity, as you can see, it's evolving and evolving and evolving to become more and more sophisticated. And we've also seen statements come from threat actors releasing logs of chats trying to prove, hey, we're not really that bad. We're trying to help them. We just want to get paid for it. And then we've seen statements saying, you know, we promise we won't hit hospitals and schools and something that would really hurt someone. We're really only going to go after big corporations that just make money because we don't really want to hurt anyone. We just want to get paid. So that's what's sort of happening in the ransomware world. And we have a couple of minutes left before we take questions. So I wanted to go through just a couple of lures that we see pretty frequently in the social engineering realm, and then we'll get back to the attack that you created. So we see this one pretty frequently, which is, I went to your business, something bad happened to me, you need to look at this. And so this is an example of one of those that says, you didn't handle your food correctly and I got sick. And so now I'm going to sue you. And we see a lot of these kind of lawsuit threats. We also see something like, you charged me for something that I didn't purchase. I don't want this from your website. I'm calling the police. You need to take care of this. And you have to remember too, there are plenty of people who their whole responsibility is customer service through email. So they've got to open these. They're required to look at these and understand what's inside of them. And so if this makes this onto the desk of a customer service rep, they're typically going to click it. And as we saw with that previous change to ransomware, this would be a great place to start putting ransomware into a customer service organization. And finally, from our CDC food poisoning piece, my family visited your location last week. We had complicated extreme food poisoning. We thought it was an allergy, et cetera, et cetera. We're preparing a lawsuit. And you can see that the doctor's note is attached. What I always say about this one is, even if this has nothing to do with your job at work, a lot of times people will click and open something just because they're curious. And in fact, they'll read this and say, you have food poisoning. Well, we don't serve food at our office, or, we're a retail store. We don't have any food. So I'm going to click this and see what the heck this person is talking about. Maybe this was misdirected. This doesn't have anything to do with us. So the social engineering angle here really reduces that person's anxiety about clicking on things, because they go from this worry to reading it, thinking, we don't have food. This doesn't make sense. So I'm sure it's fine. I'm going to check it out. And they open it. And of course, there's a malware attack chain after that. And I want to do one more before we go back to our campaign that we were creating. You may have seen this one before. This is one of my favorite social engineering lures ever. It appears to come from a lawyer at this law firm with the logo at the top. This is a real law firm that was being spoofed and leveraged by a threat actor. It says, I'm a senior partner. Your spouse has contacted me to prepare your divorce papers. Here is the first draft. Please contact me as soon as possible. The thing that I always say about this, of course, it is a URL attack, as we talked about in the beginning. The thing I always say about this one is that a lot of people will say to me, well, I'm not married, so I would never fall for this. And I say, really, you're not married, so you wouldn't click on this? 1 million copies of People magazine sold with Angelina and Brad Pitt on the front of it disagree. People are interested in other people's divorces. And if this is rerouted to someone who is not married or is not worried about divorce, is possibly even more likely to click, because there is no concern that this has anything to do with them. And then they become curious. So always be skeptical when you see some of these social engineering lures and think, oh, I would never click on that. Are you sure? And then my other point is that, okay, you would never click on that. Yes, you will outsmart the threat actors every time. You would never click on it. But do you know anyone who would click on it? I know hundreds of people that would click on this. So I think that it's really important to see things, not just from your own point of view as somebody who works in this, industry and is constantly thinking 2 steps ahead and has some of that vigilance around good security practices, but thinking about people who maybe don't, or like I was talking about before from the customer service angle, people who their responsibility in their job is to read these emails, look at what's attached to them, work on them, process them. That's their job. Opening these files, looking at these attachments is their responsibility. And so they don't just have the social engineering aspect and concern of, oh no, my company is in trouble. They think personally, this is my job, my responsibility, and I don't want to get in trouble. So I'm going to open this and take a look. So pull your piece of paper out. If you scribbled it out, that's okay. If you made changes while we were going through some of these threats, that's okay too. So who did you decide to target? Who did you pretend to be? What payload did you choose? What was your social engineering lure? And I challenge you today or tomorrow, as the conference goes on, share your attack with 2 friends, look at theirs. If you know anyone in here, get really crazy, make one new based on something that we talked about, something that we looked at, be a really creative criminal mind, and realize that these criminals in the threat actor groups, they have to do this all the time. They have to really sit, creatively think, what's going to get the most clicks? There's risk involved in sending these campaigns. There's financial cost. They've got to use the infrastructure. They have to focus on it. They might have to rent pieces of a botnet. There's financial implications for them making mistakes. So they have to be as good at this as they possibly can be. They have to get in as many inboxes as they possibly can. So what would you do if you were in that position where you're sending out all of these attacks and you have to make sure that they get clicked on? So we've got a couple of minutes for questions. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the question box and I will try to get to as many of them as I can. Will we get a recording or the slides for this excellent presentation? I am not sure, but I believe that yes, ISACA will be recording them and I can get them a copy of the slides for sure. What pathways should a CS student chase when it comes to cybersecurity? What would you do if you were in the position of a computer science student? Okay, so I'll go back to my favorite protocol point, which is start with a protocol. TCP/IP Illustrated Volume 1 and Volume 2 are a good place. Go grab those from the library and really understand the technical communication capabilities of computers. Start to really understand those protocols at a deep level. And once you understand them, start figuring out how to break them and start figuring out how they can be abused. If you feel really strong in your protocol, specifically networking, you will be able to go really far in terms of a very lucrative career there. And the reason I say that is because information security, it comes down to securing that information. And when information travels, it's not secure. So if you can understand the networking protocols that allow information to travel, that's what allows you to secure it. Are attacks different against cloud infrastructure? Great question. Yes. So something that we have definitely seen is these third-party application tokens. And the way that works is Office and G Suite, Office 365 and G Suite both allow you to authorize applications to act on your behalf, similar to the way that you log in, for example, to other websites using your Facebook account or using your Apple ID or using your Amazon Pay. Those federated logins and those application authorizations are the main attack vector that we see against cloud infrastructure, where the threat actor will social engineer their target to allow a malicious application to have unfettered access to their identity in Office 365 or in G Suite. The G Suite and Office 365 corporate identity is so powerful. It's a completely different game from stealing your personal identity, like your social security number, etc. Stealing your employee identity gives you access to corporate resources, such as corporate bank accounts. I don't know about you, but if I had the choice between my personal checking account and my employer's checking account, I know whose is bigger. So if you're a threat actor, going after the identity of someone in their corporate employment world is much more valuable because you can do so much more with it. The other thing about these third-party malicious applications is that they are the best way to bypass two-factor authentication because you authorize them once and they remain persistently authorized until they are deauthorized by the user or by the administrator of that Office 365 domain. Meaning they put the two-factor in once and that's it. They have access forever. And they can do things like read email, read calendars, send files. They can make email rules, meaning any kind of rule that you could write to send an email off of that particular account to another account. They can do things like that. All of these capabilities that a user has, those third-party applications can have as well. And they persist unless you kick them out. They're very dangerous. Cloud attacks are the next frontier. I think we'll definitely see that, especially as threat actors move to those as their infrastructure. A lot of people are asking for the recording. The recording is coming from ISACA, and that will be made available. And we can also make available the slides, no problem. Any other questions in our final 2 or 3 minutes? Okay. Well, I really appreciate all of you joining me. Thank you so much for your attention. And I really urge you to put together those, put together your attacks, compare them to somebody else, get really creative with them, see who you would attack, see what you would do, see what your friends say, and think that's really what the threat actors do, is they really sit and brainstorm about who the best targets are, what they're going to get out of them, and what their goals are in the end to have a financial payday or to get some kind of access. All right. Oh, one other question. What's your favorite topic when you started your career? My favorite topic was networking, TCP/IP, DNS. Those are my favorite things because they're really fascinating. They're the backbone of the internet. And I think that monetizing my stress over constantly being worried about things being secure has been positive. So find what you're stressed out about and try to pull it into your career. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of the conference and look forward to talking with you soon.